Why, hello there. Thank you for joining me. I've got a short one today, but it's also, I would consider it an extremely relative one. But before I get started, I will be talking a little bit about today about the status of, I don't know, maybe a little bit of racism in this country. So let me give you an update on some of that stuff. I've been talking about these states in this country which are denying funds to feed the kids this summer. Well, guess who just added their name to the list? A whole bunch of different states are now added to that list of, we don't want food for children. Their parents should be more responsible. Starve the children to punish the parents. That's our plan. So let me remind you of one thing. Um, the famous football person, Brett Favre. Mississippi is one of the poorest states in this country. Mississippi also was one of the first states to have their water is privatized, okay? So if you want to see what's coming next for the rest of us whiteys and the rest of the world, pay attention to Mississippi. Their water has been in horrible shape for a very long time. Very, very poor in that state. So what did Brett Favre do? I've never watched a football game, so I don't have any particular axe to grind in this thing. Brett Favre, Favra. He was Brett Favre's scandal explained. Ex-NFL quarterback accused of misusing Mississippi state welfare funds. So essentially, this jackass took money from the poorest people in the country, and now Mississippi is not going to give the kids food this summer. Anybody going to do what that guy in Nebraska did and do any protesting for the kids? Those kids need adults to take care of them. They're not tiny adults. They are children. Hall of Fame quarterbacker Brett Favre is in hot water for his connection in the Mississippi welfare scandal involving the misappropriation of roughly $77 million in state funds. Favre, who has not been criminally charged, has denied knowing that the money he received for different projects was welfare money. Court filings, text messages, and tax records show the complexity of the situation. Favre is currently one of 47 defendants in a civil lawsuit over misspent welfare money in the most recent development. So basically, I'm not going to dig in bit by bit, but I'll just give you an overview. The entire welfare scandal, and there's also Wikipedia pages, and I will put that down below. The entire welfare scandal is Mississippi's largest ever public corruption case. And what I'm trying to do now is I'm only going to be recording the shows which show the worst nature of these people. Because I don't know what else to do. I've got all these open files. I want to share them all I can. So I've got to kind of pick out the worst cases, right? The entire welfare scandal is Mississippi's largest ever public corruption case. It involves money from the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, a federal program that provides grant funds to states and territories to help families in need. According to the benefits website, state-administered programs may include child care assistant, job preparation, and work assistant. And then one guy has already pleaded guilty. I went through all the files and stuff. I'm not just guessing. I mean, he was writing text messages saying, "Hey, if we do this," he one of the things he did was he had them give him a whole bunch of money to have his daughter's college have a volleyball court built. Instead of food for the kids, his daughter got a team volleyball thing at her college. So, yeah, I listened to it all. I'm just not guessing. This is a big, huge deal. And he was just caught. I mean, that's all there is to it. So they all got caught. So anybody going to protest against these dirty people in this country? Hey, we're surrounded by them, right? Okay, let's talk about today. Today is a huge massacre that even people in that area were not aware of to this date. It is the Tulsa Race Massacre, also known as the Tulsa Race Riot. or Black Wallstreet Massacre. Were you aware that at one point there was a place in this country, specifically in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that was a black community all run by black people? It was called Black Wallstreet. And what happened on May the 31st to June the 1st, 1921, when mobs of white residents, some of them had been appointed by deputies, as deputies by the cops. They tore the place down, okay? And I have two clips we will be playing today that will tell the whole story, so I don't need to tell the story because it's already been told. And I'd like you to pay attention to certain things. I've been talking about the law a lot and these statutes of limitations. Anybody get caught in any of this stuff? Well, no, of course not, because of these statutes of limitations. And another thing I'd like to point out to you, this was we also around that time frame, because this was 1921. In 1915, I've talked about this in the past. One of the first movies in this nation was called The Birth of a Nation, a totally racist movie showing people trying to lynch black men for trying to supposedly be with white women. In this case in Tulsa, gets triggered by the exact same thing. This is a cut and paste operation, okay? And it was pretty significant how all of these people, planes bore down on the people. This has never happened in U.S. history, okay? The U.S. government literally attacked these people. They brought in planes. They dropped bombs on them. They did about anything they could to wipe these people out. And of course, I don't believe from what I have found that nobody was compensated, okay? This is how it goes. They pull these stunts, they run out the statute of limitations, and then they've got your whole property, right? So around that same time frame, I'd like to point your attention to a show I did in the last year or two, Osage Nation. Osage Nation. Why would I bring this up? Well, because it's in Oklahoma, the same time frame. The Osage Nation was what got the FBI in this country formally working. What happened, I'll just give you a tiny bit of an overview because Osage Nation is a fascinating story in the exact same time frame. What happened to them? Well, the Osage Nation had been pushed around by the U.S. government from reservation to reservation, okay? And they got bought out on one reservation, so they had a certain amount of money. So they were kicking them out of another place. I think it was Kansas was their last place. So they were kicking them out of Kansas because every time they find something good on the property, they kick out the Indians, right? So they found something good in Kansas. So they said, get out of here, go move. So they said, okay, well, we're going to take our money and we're going to go buy our own plot of land. So would they go? They go to Oklahoma. They picked a piece of land that absolutely nobody wanted, okay? It was dirt and rocks, okay? Because they thought, well, this will be safe. They don't want us here. They will leave us alone once we get here. Well, what happened? Well, they found oil. Then everybody figured that these Indians did not deserve to have all that money. So the U.S. government literally controlled the money. And so they only gave out so much of the money to so many people. And it's so rigged by the whole system along the way. So what happened to them? Well, so many of them were getting robbed and murdered, poisoned in their homes. Their houses were being burned down. And there weren't that many people in the tribe. But once this money got divided out, the white people thought, hey, they don't deserve that money. So they literally burned them out, killed them, murdered them. And that was the founding of the FBI was come in to help solve this case. Well, did they solve it? Oh, let me let you guess for a second here. Do you think the FBI solved anything? Do you think these native Indians got anything back? Well, I think they got a little bit of a settlement down the road here. They just did a movie called Killer of the Flower Moon, which was probably more slanted toward the white people. But anyway, so yeah, so that's what happened to the Osage. So they get a lousy piece of land, they find oil, and then they make a tremendous. At one point, the Osage Nation was the richest people in the entire world, okay? And that wasn't good enough for the white folks. So these two cases between Osage and this Greenwood deal certainly have a hint of familiarity to me also, okay? Let me tell you, when was Osage? Osage was 19th century. They did move from modern day Kansas into Indian Territory. Indian Territory was what is now present day Oklahoma. And so the Osage people started. I only found out about the Osage people because I'm kind of nuts for trying to find out when things get started, right? So one day I just happened to be looking to find out how did the FBI get started. I landed on the Osage case. So I'd never heard about them before in my entire life. So yeah, it happened around the same time. I don't need to keep scrolling around here, but it was within, okay, it was within a couple of years of the rest of this thing, okay? Because, and I'll be talking soon about the Jesuits, okay? So I want you to just keep this in your mind for a bit here. In 1843, the Osage asked the federal government to send black robes, Jesuit missionaries, to the reservation to educate their children. The Osage considered the Jesuits better able to work with their culture than the Protestant ministers. So that didn't turn out too well, but I want you to remember that part about the Jesuits intersected with these people at one time. So, yeah, the Osage ended up with, let me see, Osage, they called them headrights, okay? So they became, yeah, the richest people in the world. When royalties peaked in 1925, annual headright earnings were $13,000. A family of four who were all on the allotment roll earned $52,800, comparable to about $600 in today's economy. So that's what they were getting paid out of this oil. So, yeah, everything always ends up. Let me see. It was 1921 to 1925, an estimated 60 Osage were killed, and most murders were not solved. Nobody solved anything, do they? The cops in this country only solve about 20% of the crimes because the cops, well, I don't think I need to explain to you what the cops are all about. So let me scroll back up here and tell you what the subject is for today. The Tulsa Race Massacre. More than 800 people were admitted to hospitals. As many as 6,000 black residents of Tulsa were interned. See, this is what's interesting, okay? And I want you to pay attention to it in these clips because they kind of rush past it just a little bit, okay? This massacre breaks out, right? And they'll explain it in the clip. So the massacre breaks out. Of course, it's always over a black kid supposedly flirting with a white girl, right? So the massacre breaks out. Gunfire is going all over the place. The government has planes are flying overhead, dropping bombs on these people, okay? So you had to be kind of coordinated, all of a sudden have planes and bombs showing up, right? So the planes and bombs are showing up. Everybody's dead. The whole town is wiped out. Not everybody's dead. I didn't mean that. But anyway, so the people who weren't dead, they got shipped off to an internment place. So they got shipped off for a couple of days. I mean, this sounds kind of planned out to me. So they get shipped out to some place and they're held there for 2 or 3 days while they dealt with the bodies and everything else. So yeah, this whole thing is, well, it's the biggest murder case by the U.S. government on their own citizens that is on record, okay? The massacre began during Memorial Day weekend after 19-year-old Dick Rowland, a black shoe shiner, was accused of assaulting Sarah Page, a white 17-year-old elevator operator in the nearby Drexel building. So, yeah, so the clips will tell you so right before this was 1921, right? So right before this, I think this was to egg it on because the Ku Klux Klan was resurgent, and it was resurgent based on the popular 1915 film, The Birth of a Nation. So that became a big Ku Klux Klan. So, in looking at patterns and looking at dates, It seems to kind of all loom around the same time. So I will also put a link to that movie if you didn't get a chance to watch it when I talked about it months ago. It's a pretty crazy movie. And if you're going to come out with your first movie and your first movie is about black people getting lynched and stuff, I think that says a lot about the people who founded this country. I think that racism has always been here and is going to remain to stay as long as the ruling class, the elites are in charge. So don't trick yourself into thinking these people have changed. They have a long history. Always look for their patterns. Like I mentioned before, that Joe Biden, remember, he stiffed the railroad workers when the railroad workers were out on a strike. They wanted to strike because of the horrible conditions in the railroads in this country. Joe Biden stiffed all of those workers. So the fact that when the auto workers were talking about going on strike, that he shows up at one of the strikes, like draping his arms around them, saying, "You guys really need more money." That was a complete pattern that Joe Biden had never exhibited. Because of Joe Biden, most people are locked up in prison because of Joe Biden's positions on crime in this country, okay? So always look for those patterns of how these things start to always happen, right? So now that it looks highly suspect, they unleash this movie, get everybody all ginned up, get the Ku Klux Klan active again, and there you go. You give yourself a race riot. So I'm going to tune out for now. I'm trying to open files that have the largest significance and I will just keep clicking around. I'll just keep sharing with you as I go along here. So I had something to say about that. Let me think here for a second. I remember what it was. Always look for patterns because, for example, Joe Biden was all like, "Oh, union workers, we love union workers." Well, guess who is going out of business? The auto business is in deep trouble. No one is soon to have a job. That is why Joe Biden was so nice and showed up at that site, because the plan was to get rid of those workers all along. So to drag them along, they came up with this fake strike and they got that guy Sean in there as their guy, right? Their people are always in on these deals. So, yeah. So, what's going to happen to those workers that Biden was draping his arms around? Well, I don't believe that anybody's going to have any work in the auto industry anytime soon. So, always look for their pattern. So, it just seems suspicious. That movie comes out. We've got the Osage Nation getting robbed. We got the people in Black Wallstreet having planes overhead dropping bombs on them. I think this sounds like a racist nation. But you know what? I'm not starting a cult. I'm sharing my work so people can form their own opinions. I'll put some articles down below for you to take a look at. And be safe out there. And goodbye for now.
60 Minutes Rewind.
Tonight we're going to report a story that's almost 80 years old, but it will come as news to most Americans as, frankly, it did to us. This country's most violent race riot didn't happen in Newark or Watts or Detroit. It happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma in June of 1921. For decades, city officials covered it up. The history books barely mentioned it, and people, white people that is, hardly ever talked about Tulsa burning. But all that's changing now. The state commission has begun investigating the riot and is already raising tough questions about what today's citizens owe yesterday's victims. And it's revived memories for George Monroe of a night 78 years ago when his mother saw 4 white men walking up to their house carrying torches.
Our mother told us to get up under the bed, and we got up under the bed. We could just see just their feet. They came in and set fire to the curtains, and one stepped on my fingers, and my sister put her hand over my mouth to be sure to stop me, because she could tell I was fixing to holler because it hurt.
Monroe escaped with some sore fingers. His home and the rest of Tulsa's black neighborhood, called Greenwood, was burning. Before the riot, 10,000 blacks lived in Greenwood, did business there, prospered there. In fact, Greenwood was one of the nation's most vibrant black communities. But children quickly learned that they lived in a different world from whites.
The tracks was a dividing line. Now, every Sunday, we would climb on top of the coal car and throw enough coal on the side of, on our side, and I guess they did the same thing, but every Sunday we had a good coal fight. We would throw at them and they would throw at us.
Like a kid's little riot?
That's a good description of it, like a kid's riot. That's right.
The kids, of course, learned from the adults. There was total segregation, wasn't there?
Oh, that was the wonder of it all. After Oklahoma became a state, the first law passed by the Oklahoma legislature was Senate Bill 1 that completely segregated the state.
Don Ross represents Greenwood today in the state legislature. He's one of the prime movers behind the campaign to uncover Tulsa's dirty little secret. How old were you when you heard about the riot of 1921?
I was 15 and in high school.
You hadn't heard about it until you were 15?
Never heard, didn't believe it.
What Ross heard then is that on the morning of May 30th, a young black man got into the elevator of a building downtown, and that the elevator operator, a 17-year-old white girl, screamed.
The Tulsa Tribune, which was the afternoon daily newspaper, printed a fantastic write-up of this event. They had a front-page story that said, "Nab Negro for attacking girl." Within the next hour, there's lynch talk on the streets of Tulsa.
Historian Scott Ellsworth has been studying the Tulsa riot for 20 years. It's not just an academic quest for Ellsworth. He was born and raised in Tulsa. So the word of a lynching was out in the streets. Whites started gathering. How were blacks reacting?
Great concern. I mean, everybody knew what was about to happen.
Many of Tulsa's blacks were veterans of the First World War and armed. A group went to the courthouse and offered to help defend the jail and its black prisoner. The sheriff told them to go home.
And as they're leaving, a white man goes up to a tall black vet and says, "Where you going with that gun, nigger?" And the vet says, "I'm going to use it if I have to." The white man says, "Like hell you are, give it to me." A struggle. Shot goes off. The worst riot in American history begins.
Just about then, as dusk was settling in, Venice Sims was getting ready for her high school prom.
Had a beautiful dress, shoes, everything new. And even some borrowed pearls. The seamstress had let me have her borrowed pearls to wear. Everything.
Do you have a boyfriend?
Sure. Secretly. My daddy didn't allow us to court. But I had one.
And then you're supposed to go to the prom, and what happens?
Well, that's when the riot, that's when it started. And that's when the bullets started falling.
Miss Sims, her family, and many Greenwood residents got out of town during the night. Others stayed and fought, but by dawn, they were overwhelmed.
Right before dawn, as many as 10,000 whites descended upon Black Tulsa.
Opening fire?
Opening fire. There was a block-by-block battle throughout the black community. They would force the occupants of a house out. If people resisted, they were murdered on the spot. The homes were looted, and then they were set fire to.
Did the white authorities do anything to try to prevent this or control it?
They don't. They spend most of their time arresting blacks and disarming blacks, preventing them from defending their homes and businesses, taking them to these internment centers around town.
Sounds like a precursor of ethnic cleansing.
Absolutely.
Kenny Booker's father hid his wife and 5 children in the attic just before armed whites came to the front door.
We could hear him from the attic talking to him. Said, "Nigga, do you have a gun?" I think he said no. And he said, "Don't set my house on fire, please." He didn't tell him why, but after he left, not long after he left, they set it on fire, and we had to scramble down in a hurry. And his sister, that's 6 years old, she said, "Is the world on fire, Kenny?" I said, "I don't know, but we in trouble, deep trouble."
The trouble came from the air, too. Investigators say some of the fires you see in this rare footage of the riot were caused by whites dropping explosives from World War I vintage planes flying over Greenwood. The flames destroyed almost every home and business in Greenwood, 35 square blocks in all.
We didn't have no home. Everything was burned. All over there where we live, just burned down to the ground.
Late in the day, martial law was declared and National Guard troops patrolled the streets. The dead were everywhere, the bodies lying where they fell. Photographers turned some of their grisly pictures into souvenir postcards. Most of the dead were buried quickly in unmarked graves around town, but some apparently were laid to rest here in Tulsa's Oaklawn Cemetery in this anonymous section reserved for paupers. There were no funerals. The authorities outlawed funerals. There were no coffins, no headstones, no records of the burials. But a 10-year-old boy saw it all. Clyde Eddy walked by the cemetery with a friend, saw some men digging and some big wooden crates.
And we went in, naturally, and walked up to the first one and raised the lid up. There were 3 bodies of black men in it, just thrown in there. And we went over to another crate, a larger crate, and raised the lid on it, and there was 4 bodies in this one. And there was, let's see, there's either 4 or 5 more boxes scattered around. And about that time, one of the men saw us, and he run us out.
The newspapers didn't think the mass graves deserved many headlines, and the White City Fathers, proud of their booming oil town, wanted to bury the story along with the bodies. The official version, typos and all, came in a National Guard report. It said there were 35 dead, 9 whites and 26 blacks. But that number just keeps on rising.
We think now that something like 300 people were killed in this.
How many people were left homeless by the riot?
Oh my gosh, 10,000 people were left homeless by the riot.
How many of those were white?
None.
The survivors lived in tents and shacks which they built themselves.
My brother was 14 at the time, and he helped my father install wood. It was raining, as I can remember, it rain. Seemed like it was rain, and we had wooden floor in our tent. We were lucky to have that.
But Tulsa's whites gave them something, promises. Now, in fact, after the riot, the city's white establishment said it was going to rebuild Greenwood. What happened?
They lied. Not a dime. They proceeded to pass a fire ordinance that said, in effect, that you cannot build on property that had been burned. They wanted to starve blacks out of the land. They made it known to all philanthropic groups, we don't want your money. We will take care of our own. And there will be no problem. They spoke. They lied.
Courts and insurance companies paid some damage claims filed by whites. All black claims were rejected. A grand jury filed no charges against whites. 57 blacks were indicted for rioting. And in fact, they'd put up one hell of a fight.
In my community, among those survivors, they won the riot. They won it. You know, only till they brought airplanes in and dropped bombs and firebombs and brought the National Guard in could they subdue my people. That's the view from the black community, that airplanes and National Guard saved them white folks. We were winning.
For Ross, setting up a legislative commission to study the riot was a way of keeping that pride alive. Eddie Faye Gates is one of the members.
It said history is the lie agreed upon. Well, somebody agreed not to tell the story of the riot in Tulsa. At first, there was denial, It didn't happen. It wasn't that bad. Now, Tulsa and Oklahoma's way past the denial stage.
The commission is looking for the truth by looking for the dead. But Greenwood is looking for more than just some unmarked graves.
Somebody has to pay when they do wrong. If there's no penalty for wrongdoing, there's no incentive for societies to do the right thing.
Who should get reparations, the 60 or 70 survivors or the descendants of all the people who were wronged at the time?
My wish list, which I don't think we'll ever get, would be that there would be adequate monetary payments to survivors, the living survivors. For the descendants, maybe scholarships for the college-age children of these descendants.
The sons don't pay for the sins of the fathers. They pay for only their own sins.
State Representative Bill Graves opposed setting up the commission and thinks Tulsa should put the past where he says it belongs, in the past.
The statute of limitations is run on the people here involved that were injured.
What would you say to one of the survivors who would say to you, lost my home, lost everything my family had worked for?
I'd have to tell them that I didn't think they have any right to money from the legislature. This is a tragic thing that happened to them. Tragic things happen to other people that seems unjust to us, yet we have to live with them.
What do you think should come out of this? A memorial?
I have no problem with a memorial. That these people should be, I think, remembered and honored for what they had to go through.
Don Ross says he doesn't need a memorial. He's already got one. His anger.
I feel strongly, if I'm ever satisfied with whatever we do, that I will let down some people who educated me in my life and who died angry. I am their living memorial. My anger is.
But George Monroe, the kid with the sore fingers, has a longer view about reparations, about monuments, and about everything that's happened and not happened in Tulsa since that dark day in 1921.
It's still here, even today in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Segregation is still here. It's still here. But it's loosening up a little bit now.
So 75 years after the riot, segregation is loosening up a bit.
A bit. That's a good description, just exactly what you said. A bit.
After unarmed father Terrence Crutcher was shot and killed by police, hundreds protested here in Tulsa. What many didn't know is that nearly 100 years ago, on these very streets on which they were marching, hundreds of African Americans were killed in one of the darkest chapters of Tulsa's and America's history. A lot of folks around here used to whisper about it over the decades, but nobody, black nor white, wanted to talk about it. And that history was being forgotten. Before it happened, Tulsa was the scene of a thriving, wealthy black community.
Black Wallstreet was the most prosperous black-owned business district in 1921.
This was Black Wallstreet. There were hundreds of black-owned businesses, everything from banks to pharmacies to the doctor's office. And black folks were making really good money. There were even 2 movie theaters, all black-owned and operated. Segregation was in full effect. We heard that there was a gentleman who owned a plane. Is that true?
Simon Berry was a pilot and owned his own plane.
Black folks were rich here, basically. They lived very good lives.
Many of them, yes. Yes, which caused some envy and anger among white people who commented, how dare those Negroes have a grand piano in their house and I don't have a piano in my house.
1921 rolls around. What happens?
Some type of confrontation between blacks and whites was inevitable because of the racial climate at that time, because of the presence of the Ku Klux Klan in almost every aspect of our society. But on this particular day, May 31st, 1921, a young black male named Dick Rowland, who worked as a shoe shine boy in downtown Tulsa, went into the Drexel building where he had been given permission to get water and use the restroom. There was a young white girl named Sarah Page who was an elevator operator. And Dick Rowland every day would go into the elevator with Sarah Page. On this particular day, after the elevator doors closed and Sarah Page and Dick Rowland were alone in the elevator, a few moments later there was a scream, the elevator doors opened, Dick Rowland ran and was later arrested, and Sarah Page initially claimed that she had been assaulted.
Brown says Page never pressed charges, but authorities did, and the damage was done. By the end of the day, the rumor mill said Page had been raped.
As word spread, angry whites were determined that they were going to take matters into their own hands.
A large crowd of white residents gathered at the courthouse. They demanded Dick Rowland be lynched. How did the black community respond to that demand to lynch this young man?
They were willing to risk their lives. They knew that they would be risking their lives to help defend Dick Rowland. And thousands of whites gathered in front of the courthouse. A white man approached a black man with a gun. He said, "What are you going to do with that gun?" He said, "I'm going to use it if I have to."
The two men argued. There was a struggle over the gun. It fired. The white resident was shot. All hell broke loose.
Blacks retreated to the Greenwood district, where they set up a barrier at the railroad tracks and were able for a short time to keep whites from invading their community. But because they were so outnumbered and outgunned, whites eventually broke through the railroad tracks and invaded what was home to Black Wallstreet, the Greenwood district.
This was the result. 35 city blocks of the black neighborhood burned to the ground. Historical photos show black residents shot dead in the streets. The historical account is that at least 300 people were killed.
There were children that were here that had been armed by their parents, that had been told that they could come down to Greenwood and shoot and kill an innocent person. Those are the same people that we grew up with in our communities, that were a part of our society.
How many black people lost their lives?
There's really no way of knowing exactly how many people lost their lives, potentially thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
What is worse, survivors say they remember death not just in the streets, but raining down from the sky.
Many of our race riot survivors have commented that they remembered seeing planes flying overhead, dropping bombs, dropping nitroglycerin bombs.
Mrs. Hazel Smith Jones is believed to be the last living survivor in Tulsa. She's 97 years old.
My daddy wasn't at home. Just the kids and Mama. They came and got us.
Was it white people from the city?
And got us to fairground. And we was there for about 2 or 3 days.
To the fairgrounds?
And my dad didn't know where we were.
Did your family want to leave?
My mother, you know, with all this stuff going on, she thought it might have been safer with them taking us out there and being with more people.
Everyone called it a race riot. The opinion piece in the newspaper condoned it, calling Greenwood Niggertown. Do you consider it a riot?
No, ma'am. It was really murder. It was a massacre. My grandmother was awakened at night and just told to run. Just get up and run. And they ran. She was only 9. They ran for days. She got mixed up from her family and lost in a chicken coop.
Calling it a riot was convenient for a city run by whites. There's no statute of limitations for murder, but there is for a riot. For the black victims, it was devastating.
They never received any type of justice for losing their loved ones, for losing their homes and the businesses that they worked so hard for, that they built from the ground up.
Every insurance claim from the Greenwood neighborhood was denied. The claims totaled about $2.7 million. Black Wallstreet did recover, but never to its former glory. Do you think life is better for black folks in America now?
Yeah. Some places, yes, some places not.
If there was any clearer sign that change in race relations has happened to this community, this was it. During a march for a black father slain by a police officer, half of those marching were black and the other half white, all marching in unison, saying Black Lives Matter. But there are stark reminders of the racism that continues to thrive in some people's hearts. So the marching and the worrying continues.